Feel the debate. Fire up your day. Middle Ground Coffee is here. Bold flavor, no size, just forward. Grab yours at store.themiddlegroundmike.com and let's go. What happens when the very way you cast your vote, a foundation of our American country, is threatened with the stroke of a pen? President Trump says he'll sign an executive order to ban mail in voting nationwide except for the military and severely ill. Supporters are calling it election integrity. Critics call it voter suppression, but here on the finding middle, we can ask, can we protect both security and access without tearing this country apart? Today, we're unpacking what this fight really means for democracy and for the United States and for you. Trump announced plans for a sweeping executive order for no mail-in voting, obviously except for the military and very ill, plus voter ID for every ballot. He justified it by saying, the US is the only country in the world allowing mail-in ballots. Fact check that is technically false. 34 countries, including Canada, UK, Australia, Germany, allow it. You can look back to his March executive order requiring proof of citizenship and banning ballots. After arriving on election day, courts have partially blocked this. The move is seen as unconstitutional. The Constitution says that this is something that has to be done by the states. I know my conservative friends won't like hearing that. If a state chooses to do it, that's that state's choice. This should be something that is up to the people of that state, whether you put it on the, as a ballot proposal in the states. I guess that could be debated. But, this is a legal powder keg. This kind of makes it like a legal powder keg, and it's going to be fought in the courts for who knows how long. Who knows if they're going to try to change little things here and there. And this is why some people are outraged. Right around 43% of Americans voted in the mail in 2020. Some people are saying it wasn't just convenience, it was necessity. Removing it would drastically cut access. I can see that point, but I don't know if considering a necessity, I would go that far. Communities of color, especially, Black and Latino voters, right, have used mail-in voting to boost turnout in states like Georgia, Arizona, and even here in my home state of Michigan. Ballots cast in 2020 were considered potentially fraudulent. That comes from the Heritage Foundation. That's fewer than lightning strikes in a year. Critics argue that this is less about fraud prevention, and it's more about chilling turnout where it hurts opponents the most. Right? We had an issue here in Michigan where I believe it was a Chinese national who was able to vote four times in one election. So there definitely needs to be a better system, right? We really got to look at that. I'm not criticizing any company or anybody like that. I think the vast majority of it is obviously accurate, but there is some context to it there, right? I think that one situation is probably the exception to the rule in a lot of cases. They argue confidence in elections has collapsed and is collapsing. Pew Research is showing 55% of Republicans don't trust mail-in ballots at all. That is a lot, and that is the majority of Republicans, but still remember there's 45% of Republicans that do trust it, which is almost an even 50-50 split. It is not as widely supported as maybe some folks are suggesting. Germany and France and others, they use, elections use more strict ID checks and centralized systems. Supporters claim the United States should follow suit. There's a lot more restrictions on a lot of things in Europe, even speech. So, I don't know if following the European model is probably the best reference. I'm not knocking Europe. There's a lot of things I think Europe does very well. But, Americans have a unique view on freedom of speech and freedom of expression, things like that, whereas the Europeans are a lot more controlling. I know the president and his supporters, they're going for uniformity argument, right? So 50 states, 50 sets of rules. That the right says it's chaos. A federal baseline, they argue, would create more clarity. While that is true, you would really need to try to change the Constitution in order to really make this a permanent thing. These concerns are not entirely invalid. Trust in elections is in a crisis right now among both parties, and ignoring that only widens the divide. We got to find a way to get people to the table and find a middle ground, and both sides have to be willing to compromise. They have to be willing to compromise to get this stuff out to the people that need it, right? There's people that can't do certain things, right? So we have to make sure that those protections are concrete. They can't be changed at a political whim, which is why being an executive order is extremely dangerous. Constitutionally, right? Articles 1 and 2, elections fall to the states, with Congress regulating some federal procedures. The president, according to the Constitution and the current, precedent from the courts, that the precedent from the court says that the president has no direct authority to rewrite voting rules. I know that's not something a lot of people want to hear, but just remember both sides. Please remember that this protects not just the side that's in power, this protects the opposite, and then gives you the protections for when the opposite party's in power, that they can't go and do the same thing to railroad you or your supporters or your side. So this is meant for not just we're going to know. It's meant to protect everybody, and it does. So I think it's something that would really have to be honed in on, and definitely should be at the state level. Court precedents. Earlier Trump orders were blocked by federal judges, even some of his own appointees. Similar rulings will likely strike down any ban on mail-in voting. It is a tall task to get that banned. These things would have to be done at the state level. And there's a lot of MAGA support at the state level, even in states that he did not win. So I think that's where, if they truly want that, that's where their focus needs to be. Blue states like California, I don't know why they call them Michigan blue, technically voted blue, or voted red, but New York probably will not comply, expects lawsuits within hours of this thing is signed. The constitutional crisis that could be sparked, a president pushing beyond his authorities, states refusing, and the voters are going to be stuck in the middle. That can create an even more chaotic situation for our country, right? That's when you start seeing riots. That's when you start seeing extremist groups gain a lot of power, and things can get very dangerous from there. We need to find the middle ground path going forward. Instead of playing the tug of war between ban mail-in voting and anything goes, a middle path could focus on reforms that both secure and expand the access to voting and mail-in voting and things of that nature, right? So universal voter ID, but free and accessible. This would take a lot of work and probably is not very likely to happen, but we'll kind of talk about it a little bit, right? Free IDs for all. If both sides truly value getting people that are less fortunate and ill the ability to vote, free IDs is definitely the way to go. Mobile ID units in rural and low income areas, and exceptions for elderly and the disabled. I think that is key. But, strengthen mail-in systems, don't kill them. Signature verification, ballot tracking apps, they're kind of already used in Colorado and Michigan. National deadline, ballots postmarked by election day must be counted. I guess I can kind of stand with the president on, it has to be counted on election day. We should not be counting ballots for weeks at a time. That definitely makes confidence a struggle. We need open audits of mail-in boxes and mail-in ballots, right? There needs to be concrete audits that the public can see. Obviously not see people's votes per se, right? But the public needs to be able to see the mail-in ballots, that they're counted accurately and it's not fraudulent, right? So that's kind of it would take a lot of wrangling for that. But, we need clear communication campaigns on the rules to reduce confusion. There's not a lot of communication. All there is rhetoric, either supporting it or against it. Again, we have to get away from rhetoric and get back to facts and make the facts appealing so that the people want to listen to them. You have to put these rules and these laws in a way and kind of get them out there on a campaign that people are going to trust it. Bipartisan oversight panels, 50-50%, whichever two parties, which obviously in every state is the Democrats and Republicans, but it should be a balanced panel. Either side should have the majority of power, whether you want to do 2 and 2, 4 and 4, but that's how it should be. So that way somebody has to compromise to get the rules ironed out, or however you want to word it, right? The middle ground isn't about compromise for compromise sake. It's about upgrading democracy and the American government. So the voters trust the process and everyone gets a fair shot to participate. President Trump's order may be legally doomed. but the debates it sparks is here to stay. Do we want a country that prioritizes access or one that prioritizes control? Or can you blend both? If I'm in the middle, we believe it doesn't have to be one or the other. Security and participation can coexist with strict guidelines on both. But only if we demand leaders who build, not just divide. Stop accepting division, stop accepting rhetoric, and only accept solutions, and solutions that can actually be accomplished, not solutions that are presented just so you can put it on a campaign talking point. Solutions that actually make it and are voted on. Solutions that can actually be passed. Putting things out just because fails everybody. But remember, everybody, this is Joe from the Middle Ground Mic. No left, no right, forward. Go ahead and get your Middle Ground coffee at store.themiddlegroundmic.com.